Explain to our audience what you think the planks would be of an economic bill of rights and what that means.
Sure. So, there's a number of planks that I lay out in the book, largely drawing on Roosevelt and then kind of updating it here for the 21st century. The most important one, the one that I start with, is this idea of a right to a job. It's that any American willing and able to work should be able to access a job, but not any job, a job that is paid a meaningful and living wage. And so this would actually set a real floor in our labor market, right? If you think about it, the labor market today, a lot of people think we have a floor in the labor market because we have a minimum wage. But there's no minimum wage that applies to unemployed workers. They don't get to access that minimum wage. So a job guarantee would say that the government is willing and able to give anybody who wants a job one. This would radically change the labor market for so many reasons. Not only would it eradicate unemployment once and for all, it would also help eradicate poverty wages. I mean, in many states across the country, the minimum wage is still well south of $10 an hour. People cannot simply live on that. I don't even think anymore $15 an hour is sufficient, not with the other demands that we put on people like rent, utilities, and healthcare costs and the like. So, this notion of a job guarantee, though, not only helps there, but it also really empowers workers in crucial ways. If you have a boss who is abusing you, verbally, sexually, etc., you actually have a real fallback position. You can actually leave and go get a job where you're not going to be harassed and mistreated. If you're a group of workers thinking about going on a strike and all of a sudden, your firm says that they're going to close down your factory or your office building if you strike and you're going to all be out of a job. Again, this is a type of institution that workers know that they will have a job opportunity waiting for them if something like that happens. So it really changes the scales of power. For listeners who might think, this is a little bit pie in the sky, I just want to throw out two pieces of information. One is the vast majority of Americans actually support this idea. Again, we did polling with Data for Progress and found that most Americans, in fact, over 80% of Americans, support the idea of a job guarantee, including most independents and Republicans as well. The second thing is that we've basically done it before. During the Great Depression, the Roosevelt administration started something called the CWA, which was the predecessor of the WPA, which most listeners are probably familiar with, the Works Progress Administration. Within 2 months, they employed 1 in 10 workers. That's not 1 in 10 unemployed workers. They employed 1 in 10 of all American workers, putting them to work doing socially meaningful things, be that planting trees, constructing schools. In some instances, they had workers actually creating underwear for the winter, long underwear for the winter, because people were going to freeze to death if they didn't have proper clothing. So the government put them to work making clothing to then give away for free to low-income citizens. So, I challenge each and every one of us to walk around your community and think about, if we had actual workers, what could they do to improve our community? And there's going to be a long list of improvements. I know that for sure.
Yeah. And that is, it also plays into like the deep puritanical notions that we have in this country about the moral failings of people not working, right? So that undercuts that argument right on its face. You also talk about right to housing, right to an education, which you mentioned earlier, but then extending that, of course, through college, right to healthcare, single payer, right to basic income. So there's a UBI element too. I guess let's touch on that, because often when you hear about these thoughts, these ideas played around with by academics like yourself, I usually see it as either or, a jobs guarantee or a UBI, but you have both.
Yeah. So I think when people posit these things as either or, they have a failure of their imagination to think about how do we fundamentally restructure not the safety net of this country, because I think that's wrong, but the well-being state. That's what I like to call it. How do we actually restructure the well-being state to make sure that each and every one of us is taken care of? I think that's the world that we really want to be working towards. The job guarantee, I think, is crucial because, as I discussed earlier, it really rebalances the power dynamics of the labor market. But it also helps ensure people don't have these negative social stigmas of being unemployed. Welfare queens. This trope is precisely what helped damn the social safety net here in the United States in the first place. But we also need to recognize that many people engage in crucial work that's not market work, right? They might be engaged in care work, for example, or they might be engaged in creative work. I, for one, have an 18-month-old, and let me tell you, staying home with my 18-month-old is far harder than me coming into the office and answering some emails and advising some students and teaching a lecture class. Care work is often far harder, but we don't reward that in the market. And so we need these two things to go hand in hand. They actually complement each other, precisely because some people shouldn't be heading into work. Some people might choose to take care of a young one, a sick loved one, an elder family member. And to combine these two ideas together is what gives people the actual freedom. The opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to send my child to daycare and go to work. Or, hey, I would like to stay home with my child who is under 2 years old and help them develop and flourish and grow as a person. And I'm going to collect that basic income to help take care of us during that time. So it provides people with real choices. And I think that's what this is about. We have this, artificial notion that negative rights plus access to the market gives us choice. But really, it's just simply not the case. I mean, most people have essentially no choice over what they do in their daily lives.
So I guess this is a perfect way to kind of wrap up here and talk about that notion of what freedom really means, because libertarians have a monopoly on the frickin' word, it seems like, in the way that they like to manipulate it, or even, libertarian or neoliberal concepts of what freedom really means. And what when you don't have economic freedom, you really don't have the freedom to do anything. And so that's kind of where we got to start, right?
Absolutely. I think reclaiming this idea of freedom is key. It's, as you highlighted, it's an idea owned by the right today. But one thing I just want to point out is that, the current system we have fails to deliver negative freedom, right? Even according to their own definition. Let's say we buy their definition, which I don't think we should. But if we buy it, their own society they've built, this neoliberal hellscape that we find ourselves in, doesn't deliver meaningful negative freedom either. Most of us spend most of our waking hours at the workplace. Workplaces are essentially mini dictatorships. We don't have freedom in the workplace, right? We are told what to do, when to do it by our bosses. That's why we have bosses. Elizabeth Anderson's work on this is just excellent. She calls it private government. And so most of us are spending, our time and receiving our wages based on what our mini dictators, our bosses, say we deserve and decide what we do with our time. So even accepting that, I think we're failing. But I don't think we should. I think we need to work on building a richer, more meaningful idea of freedom. I think this is one reason why people are so up in arms over the current presidential election, for example. President Trump is a dire threat to democracy. Democracy is a cornerstone of freedom. I do believe that. But I also don't think, again, that it's sufficient for our vote to matter, for us to even have time to go to the polls, right? How many workers don't have time to go to the polls because that's not a national holiday in America, because their boss, again, withholding their freedom, says, no, you can't take time off of work to vote. We need to challenge this concept and reclaim it to be a more inclusive idea that actually provides us with real opportunities and choices to define the lives that we, our loved ones, and our communities collectively lead.